Hello.
Hey.
Hey.
How is everybody? We've got our live Flutter Engage extended with the Flutter Denver crew. I will quickly run through who all of these wonderful people are. I'm Rona. I co-host the Flutter Denver meetup with Michael Jordan and Bert. And then we also have Randall joining us. He is one of the very, very original Flutter GDEs. I learned today he was a GDE before there were things called Flutter GDEs. So we're super lucky to have him joining us. And then, of course, the man of the hour, we have Chris, who jumped on early for us, earlier than he was scheduled for. We thank you for that. I know there was a little bit of a scheduling mix-up, but we're glad to get you in here.
Sure.
Before we start battering you with questions, I want to run through a few housekeeping items here. Let me share my screen. So you've probably seen this on some of our other Flutter Engage stuff. We want to have a couple do's and don'ts. Do put your Flutter question in the YouTube chat and prefix it with Flutter question. That will make it easier for us to identify it and get it asked. Generally, be a good human. Don't post adult content. Don't be rude. Don't put offensive comments in the chat. Don't advertise or promote anything. And don't repeat your question over and over again. We will see it and we will get it asked. If we run out of time and we don't get it asked, we're keeping track of the questions and we will make sure to get them answered on Twitter later down the road. And the next thing I wanted to let you all know about is the Flutterista conference, which is happening April 17th. If you want more information, go check out flutteristas.org. The schedule has been posted. Lots of good talks. It's basically a conference that's been organized and run by the Flutterista group. But of course, it is open to everybody to come enjoy and learn about Flutter. And that is all I have. I think we can jump right into questions. And I think I'm going to start it off by asking Chris to give us a little bit of background on what you were doing before you came to Flutter, how you're enjoying it, what exactly your day-to-day looks like. Just a little background, whatever you're willing to share.
Sure. So I've been at Google for about I've been almost 6.5 years. The last 2.5 have been on the Flutter team. Before that, it was a year on the Android team and then 3 years on cloud, all about tools. So it's always been about developer tools. And then before that, before I came to Google, I spent about 20 years as a contributing member of the Windows developer community, which included 3 years working at Intel, 8 years working at Microsoft. I did a bunch of consulting and that kind of stuff too. I was one of a person just like Randall is for Flutter. I was that for Windows-based technologies back in the day. And in terms of what does my day-to-day look like, as a product manager at Flutter, I spend a lot of time in meetings. Spend a lot of time meeting with customers, understanding what their pain points are, meeting with lots of time understanding user experience research, understanding how customers are using Flutter broadly, things you don't get from one-on-one interviews. A lot of times working with our engineers, of course, right? What bringing that information to the engineers, figuring out what our plans are, what can we do along the tooling front. My specific role at Flutter is I'm responsible for the end-to-end developer experience. So I spend a lot of time with the framework engineers, spend a lot of time with the tooling engineers. I spend a lot of time working on the broader ecosystem. So for example, I'm a member of the Flutter ecosystem committee, which is responsible for deciding which of the packages and plugins on PubDev are rewarded with Flutter Favorite. So that's kind of the work I do, and that there's a lot of communication when I'm not meeting with people. I'm writing specifications or reading design docs and giving feedback and that kind of work. I also tend to do a lot of work with our events. I'm responsible for, the kind of giant "What's new in Flutter" post that comes along with every one of the stable releases, as well as pulling together a lot of material for recently at Flutter Engage, working with our top customers and partners and pulling together a lot of material for the keynote for Flutter Engage. So I get to do actually a lot of things. I get to touch pretty much every part of Flutter. It's pretty great, actually.
Yeah, wow. That is a ton of stuff. I'm curious, when you say that you work with customers, are those internal customers, or are they like the eBay Motors of the world? Are you working with external customers, or both?
Both. I work with both. Primarily, I'm focused on third-party customers. eBay Motors, for example, was a customer I worked with since they were first getting started with Flutter, and lots of customers like that. But I'm always working with new customers at Google, internal customers that want to understand whether Flutter is right for them, what level of support the Flutter team can provide to them, et cetera. And we work pretty closely. For example, Google Pay. We worked very, very closely with Google Pay as they, moved over 1.9 million lines of code that they rewrote in Flutter.
Wow.
Their initial release was all about, functionally complete. And so we've been spending a lot of time helping them optimize their code, bring down their app size, bring down the memory usage, bring down their, processing time, et cetera. So a lot of that is working with them, on their specific Flutter code. Are they using best practices? But a lot of it is actually taking what we learn from working with closely with internal customers like Google Pay, where we can actually pore over the source code, find kind of systematic problems that they've run into, and kind of pour them into our guidance, into our docs, into our samples, into our tools, so that we can make other customers with large apps get those experiences out of the box if we can.
Nice. You mentioned optimization and performance. We actually have a question coming in from Jeremy about that very thing. How do you optimize for GPU performance? He's already removed opacity, reduced clip, and use of shader mask, but still have some shadows for design purposes. On an oldish device, GPU is stuck on SKU canvas.flush.
Wow.
I have to admit, I don't know what that means. I hope you know what it means.
PM, right? We're doing great right out of the box. I would love to say, check the AX register. You make sure to keep it value below 4. Otherwise, you're going to have GPU problems. But then I would just be making stuff up, because that has nothing to do with anything. Randall, you probably noticed that as soon as I said it. Yeah. So, Jeremy, what I will recommend instead is check out, we have a great deal of documentation about how to optimize your Flutter performance on flutter.dev. And I will also point you at we have a great deal of tooling built into Flutter Dev Tools, all about performance and finding jank and drop frames and all kinds of tools that you should dig through. So it's, as with all debuggers, Flutter Dev Tools has a lot more functionality than is readily discoverable. There's all kinds of hidden gems in there. So I would recommend digging through the documentation for Flutter Dev Tools. And between the recommendations and the Flutter Dev Tools, I think you will find a lot in there that can help you.
So can I jump in on this one, Rona?
Absolutely. Anybody, go for it.
So Chris, that's a great answer, and I agree. I've been playing with the dev tools, and I noticed there was a significant bump up in dev tools with the Flutter 2 release, because the layout manager and stuff, there was sort of the pre-release, and it's like some of the things you did the layout. Now all of a sudden with Flutter 2, I keep checking things, and I'm so surprised and impressed with the depth of
Good
it.
news.
It's really
I'll take that feedback. Back to the tooling team. We worked for about a year.
I was surprised at how robust it had become, because it seemed like it was very subtle how it was announced. And I've seen Philippe's videos where he was discussing about the performance, and they keep calling them flame charts. technically they're icicle charts that you inverted them and turned them blue. But I went and I did the deep dive on trying to learn more about flame charts and icicle charts and the performance. And I still find it a huge learning curve challenge. That the documentation, you're right, there is a nice basic, but it's one of those things like, oh, here's Hello World, and I asked you how to build an app. And you go, is there plans going forward to, because I think there's, like you said, a wonderful tool there with a lot of robust depth, but it's very difficult to dig in to understand how to use it. I start going through the icicle chart and I'm trying to figure out how to do the time slices and dig through to find interesting information without it being some, canned little hello world thing. And I get lost in the minutia.
Yeah. So this is the case with every advanced debugging tool on the planet. This is not a problem unique to Flutter, unfortunately, because then we could just use previous kind of solutions and apply them into Flutter. Actually, I think from a usability point of view and discoverability point of view, DevTools is probably pretty good.
Yeah,
we're pretty proud of it. That said, Michael, you're totally right. There's lots and lots of more we can do there in terms of, how does DevTools really work? How do you really use it? And how do you apply it to real world applications, right? How do you actually track down things? You're right, Philip's videos, and he's continuing to produce more of those because they've been really popular, are super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, Flutter is no longer a spring chicken, right? I mean, we have spent the last 2 years hardening the engine and the framework, as well as bringing it on to other platforms, which again helps us harden it as we take in more use cases. And at the same time, our tools are gaining sophistication and advanced features, and they're getting, unfortunately, more complicated. But the reason all of that is happening is because we've got more and more customers, hundreds of thousands of customers building, millions of lines of code. And so we continue to bring DevTools up to meet the challenge for those larger apps and those larger customers. But it's a treadmill, right? It's an ongoing battle. We will always have more work to do to make it easier to find performance problems, to make it possible to find difficult performance problems. This is ongoing work.
I will add to that. That's brilliant what you just said, but I will add to that if you go to YouTube search and you type Flutter DevTools, and then the trick is sort it by newest first. So a little pull down on the side. I do things like that every day to look at all the new Flutter things. The screencasters are catching up with some of this. As soon as they start seeing new toys like this, you start to see screencast after screencast on the thing. So, I mean, the big 5 and 6 are I think I saw DevTools from at least a couple of them now. So check those out. I highly recommend that. In fact, it's getting to the point because I watch everything that's in English, which is a lot. I'm busy about 1 or 2 hours a night just watching new videos to see who I can recommend, maybe learn a few things as well. I watch every single one of those because I consider that part of my requirement as a GDE, because I want to be able to tell you guys.
That's a great suggestion. And Chris, basically you gave me the answer that I would expect. All right, instead of, blow it off and shuffle off, just to hear that that it's a problem. And I see how hard your team is working on it. And I do really appreciate it because, I'm blown away. From when I first started looking at DevTools a year or more or so ago and where it is today, and I'm still blowing, and it's all for free.
Well, thank you, Michael. That is feedback I will take back to the team for sure. Yeah. They work very hard on it. They're very passionate. They're very talented engineers, and they will be happy to know that their hard work has paid off. And
very appreciated. And like I said, with the new layouts, I just this last week solved several issues I was dealing with quickly and efficiently by just jumping into that tool and looking at the layout.
That's fantastic. Glad to hear it.
So Randall brought up YouTube videos, which goes directly to this question. I think one of the ways I would answer it. Blake asks, as someone new to programming, learning Dart and Flutter, I appreciate the great documentation. Any tips on additional resources? Interested in Flutter Web 2. I've actually been surprised at how much really great content gets put out on YouTube, not just by the Google team, but also by individual contributors, independent contributors. Are there any other resources that you all would recommend for somebody like Blake?
Yes. So two stick out. One is a great course. It's not null safe, unfortunately. So we kind of we set it back in terms of usefulness about a month ago, but it's still a fantastic resource, which is the Dart and Flutter course from App Brewery. It's about 25 hours online. It's $10 a person. We've been supplementing it to help make sure Flutter developers get the training they need. It's been super popular. I recommend it to everyone. It's a fantastic course. And then in general, wherever you get your training, somebody has been filling in, Flutter training courses in all of those spots. I myself, when I first joined the Flutter team, took the App Brewery course, so I'm pretty partial to that. But there, as you mentioned, Rona, there's lots of great videos. The Flutter DevRel team is fantastic. They're always producing amazing stuff. It manages to be very technical and very helpful, and also very approachable. It's an amazing mix. Honestly, you can't go wrong. And then most recently, Remy and a bunch of other of the Flutter folks from the community have built this enormous, like telephone-sized book all about Dart and Flutter, which I think is fantastic. Just the first 500 pages alone, which takes you from nothing to knowing Dart, modern Dart, including null safety, that's worth the price of the book all by itself. I learned things reading through that book. And then, of course, all the Flutter material after that is fantastic. So, there's a ton of really great materials out there.
Where's Remy's book?
So let me look up the title. I never remember. I just think of it as...
That sounds phenomenal. Because like you said...
That book, yeah.
It's the Flutter complete reference. And of course, it's Alberto and Felix and Maj and Remy.
So you
I don't know how I've missed that.
I've heard of it, but nobody sent me a copy yet, so I don't have it.
I paid for my own copy. It's fantastic.
All right. Well, but you can expense it on Google. I am me. Got one pocket to the other.
That's true. Right.
All right. I think it's this one. I'm posting a link here.
Yeah.
This link is horrible.
Flutter complete reference.
Yeah. Okay. Let me continue with what Chris was saying there. That there's a lot of really good written material. A lot of it appears in Medium. That's one place you should search for the word Flutter as often as you can. Dev2 is also another good source. So those are the two sort of written places that I see a lot of great stuff. Also Stack Overflow, amazingly enough. Look at the answers on Stack Overflow, because you'll see important tips and tricks about that. Actually, look at everything that's in flutter.dev/community. There are like 8 or 9 different ways that you can put a question up somewhere, and I'll probably see it. I look at all those. So you'll probably get an answer from me if it's on one of those places in Flutter Dev community. But that's another great way to learn this, is that if you start something, if you get stuck, there are so many places to ask questions these days. The community is huge.
Oh, yeah. I found the community just to be amazing. It's probably one of the most supportive and helpful communities. I was going to mention, I'll cheap shill for him because I've enjoyed and learned so much from Andre Bizotto and his Coding with Andre, Rezo Coder.
Oh, yeah.
There are just so many great resources. If you go out to YouTube and type in Flutter, like I said, there's been very few disappointments and many great little nuggets from different people that are out there helping support the Flutter community, which I think is really fun about being a Flutter developer.
As much as I like the technology, I have to say that I think it's the community that is my favorite part of Flutter.
Yeah, because I know you used to work at Microsoft and on WPF. I tried being a WPF programmer in the day with .NET. I was trying to get off WinForms and move to something that was more. I never felt a community like I do with Flutter and Dart, which it's fun. I enjoy this.
Yeah, I think that's really, really the thing about the.
Yeah,
I think that it's the thing that separates Flutter from React Native. The community is amazing, and I think too just the professional quality of the tools. It's incredible, and it made moving from React Native to Flutter a no-brainer, and probably the happiest thing I could have ever done.
well, if we can make you happy, then that's great.
Well, and
One Flutter developer at a time. That's my job.
I would question though, if you're looking at online material, please be sure it's relatively recent.
Yeah.
Flutter takes a 30-degree turn about every 9 months.
Yes,
Trust me, I've been around this for a long time.
Yeah,
very dynamic. If you're reading stuff that's even 2 years old or a year and a half old, especially if it doesn't say new is doesn't need it anymore, you're looking at stuff that's way too old. Most stuff still doesn't even cover null save.
Yeah.
So, and that's a really important change in the last few months.
And one last point I'd like to throw out there is I think the point that Flutter and Dart is all open source is so subtle and not exposed enough. I can't tell you how many times I've dived down through the code to really understand. You want to learn how to write good Flutter and Dart? Look what the Dart team's doing. Look what the Flutter team is doing and the examples they have. I have learned how to change my coding habits based on diving into the open source that's underneath.
And following up on that, I don't know if y'all know that if you look at your IDE has some way of showing you where the definition is for this. And you think, well, that's in my code somewhere. But if you're looking at something like stateless widget, you can drill down on the source of that and see how the guys in Mountain View figured this out.
Exactly. I do that all the time.
Way cooler than, I mean, the docs are good. The docs are great, by the way, compared to most open source software. But to be able to drill down and see exactly how
the real code,
to see the real code, it sometimes requires a lot of understanding, but it's all there.
Yeah, and the ability to be able to fix it too if there's a problem is amazing.
Right. Yeah, that too.
One last point, somebody mentioned in the chat comments that Twitter is a great resource as well. The community is really active there, so don't be afraid to drop a question there. Just make sure you tag it Flutter and everybody will see it. Okay, next, Chris, can you speak more to some of the user research that your team does on Flutter and what insights are gained? Are there any great examples to share? Good question.
Yeah, so actually I keep saying this and you're probably tired of hearing me say it. Every part of the Flutter team is exceptional, right? The engineers are exceptional. My peer PMs are exceptional. The DevRel team is exceptional. And it is no exception that the user experience research team is exceptional as well. The work they do in terms of, probably the thing you've seen most often is we do a quarterly Flutter developer survey. And we ask a lot of questions and we measure high-level things like customer satisfaction and then track where people are using Flutter over time and how often and professional versus hobbyist and overlap with other technologies. But then we also drill down into kind of subject specific areas like how do people feel about the ecosystem and the tools and things like that. And we use that data to make our product decisions, right? Where should we put our engineering effort, right? What's the highest impact thing that's the most important for our customers, that is the hardest, for the biggest pain point? Where do we focus our energy? So they're fantastic from that point of view in general. And I could give you many examples of places where we've made the product better as a direct result of user experience research, but I'll just pick one. One of my favorites, and I think it's probably the one that people see in their daily lives most as Flutter developers, is the error messages. We have spent a bunch of time looking at the common error messages that people get and making them more actionable, right? It's one thing to see, line 10 syntax error. It's another thing to see, here's the error you ran into. Here's the most common cause of that error. Here's probably, one of 3 options that you want to do to solve that error, and here's a link to where you can learn more information. I mean, the level of thought and depth that go into the error messages is, from my point of view, that only happens to very mature frameworks, 5-10 years down the line, where the engineers have been hammered by the same questions over and over. But it's the user experience researchers that have driven, based on user feedback, and focusing on error messages and doing user research studies on the error messages in terms of how do we make developers more effective, that have brought that so much earlier into the Flutter lifecycle, that makes it even more mature and more usable and more bulletproof earlier in its life cycle. So user experience research folks are invaluable in our Flutter team.
And I can tell, I have noticed the difference growing over my last 2.5 years doing Flutter development and stuff. It's very much appreciated. It is really, really nice.
Great.
There's one spot that could improve just a tiny bit, and that is when an error occurs in an asynchronous routine. And I see this happen sometimes with network image, when I'm trying to display a network image and it's using the image provider, I guess. But the error seems to happen later. So sometimes it's hard to track down what actually was the source of the problem. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there's just sometimes a little bit of a disconnect between an error that's happening asynchronously and affecting another widget. And you'll see the error message in the widget, but you won't really see where it came from.
Yeah, actually, there has been an underlying issue that we've had for a while that we should see fixed, hopefully in the next stable release of Flutter, where we were actually kind of erroneously swallowing some of the exceptions inside, even the unhandled exceptions inside the framework. And so we have worked to expose those now, so that hopefully, Bert, that will solve a lot of your problem, where an exception happens synchronously or asynchronously, and instead of swallowing it in a way that makes it hard to find, we're now making it very visible. You might see a bunch of exceptions in your code that you didn't expect to now, because now we're exposing them and making you deal with them. We think of that as better. You may disagree, but that's a change you'll see coming.
So there's one situation for me that comes up a lot, and that is just displaying an image, grabbing the image from a web server using the network image, I guess. And if that image isn't present, I just want to display a stock image in place of what was expected. And trapping that situation and being able to display a local asset image is really hard. Maybe there's a technique I haven't found yet.
I believe, I'm looking up the constructor right now. Yep. I believe there's a way to handle that in the kind of error case. Hey, show this other thing.
In some situations there is, and in some there's not. That's been my experience recently.
Yeah, there's an error builder property of image.network that is, I believe, specifically for that case. And then there's also the loading builder too, which says, hey, I'm downloading it. And then, once you get it, you show the image, but then which is the regular builder. But then there's the error builder too that you might want to check out that might solve your problem.
Okay. I'll check that out.
Okay, next question. This one's near and dear to my heart because I am a co-founder of a startup, and the reason we were able to get off the ground is because Flutter made it easy for me, one person, to build an app and deploy it to 2 platforms. So this question is, do you think that startups will start to incorporate Dart and Flutter more readily, since it could cut the time to market to web and mobile considerably and reduce maintenance costs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Blake. And it's not a matter of whether I think it or not. It actually happens, Rona. You're not the only one, as you might
Right.
imagine. And in fact, we track kind of 3 customer slices, kind of broadly. The kind of top 1,000 or 2,000 apps in either the Play Store or the App Store, which those are the big companies that are like the Twitters of the world, right? That are driving all of their traffic through their Twitter apps, and they are true kind of technology vendors, and they have one dedicated team to every platform that they care to manage, and those are the ones that are wringing the most out of every platform, and they have multiple native teams and et cetera. We're cracking that market as well, but where we see the largest amount of Flutter growth is in 2 areas. One, startups. It is a no-brainer. I talk to startups all the time who are like, I don't have enough engineers, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough funding. I got to get to market as soon as I can, but I want to hit Android, iOS, web, et cetera. I want to hit everything all at once because I want to get as many customers and as much revenue as I can before I run out of runway, right? Before I can no longer be a startup. Flutter is fantastic for that because not only does it provide fast development lifecycle and beautiful apps and native speeds, right? It provides all the goodness you get from targeting each one of these platforms independently, but it also gives single source code base, multiple targets from the same source code base. So from a startup point of view, Flutter, we see a huge explosive growth in startups. And then the other big market we see in track is those the line of business kind of B2C, B2B kinds of, they only have a small number of resources internally. They have to support the broadest number of users, either their own employees or, their partner customers, things like that. They previous to Flutter, technologies like Flutter, they would have to pick, right? Oh, I want Android, I want web. And that's all they could do because that's all the resources they have. They're trying to save money, not make money. And so for them, they have small engineering teams often. So we see a great deal of growth with that as well, because again, single source code base, you can get all the benefits, target multiple platforms. So we're seeing a lot of growth in startups and the kind of these internal line of business apps as well.
What kind of growth are you seeing in the different areas of the globe? Because I know there's a big Flutter community in China. I don't know that the US has as much adoption as Europe or China. I'm curious if you've seen that changing at all.
Obviously we started in the US and have a lot of developers in the US and there are multiple regions of the world that all kind of vie in the top 3 or 4, and they're all very close to each other. Mm-hmm. US, India, China, South America, right? These, and we've seen, of course, the initial country was North America, but we have seen explosive growth in those other 3 regions around the world.
Great, good to know. Okay, I'd love to talk about a few Flutter web things. One of my questions is actually about SEO support for Flutter for web. I know that it's been a challenge to implement it for Flutter for web, and I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that, why it's been a challenge, and if it'll be anything that gets focus anytime soon.
Yeah, so just stepping back, right? The goal of Flutter Web was not to build websites, was not to build, long flowy document, static document websites where you pull in viewers because of search results.
Right.
That is not the goal for Flutter. The goal for Flutter is I've got a mobile app that I want to bring to the web. I've got a highly interactive, must be look great, must work great app that I want to distribute via the web. No need for anyone to set up anything. It is not for, so it's if you think about the distinction between web apps and websites, Flutter is very much for web apps, right? Apps that happen to be distributed via the web, not kind of static document sites where you're trying to drive in all the SEO. And the reason that's the case is because of these kinds of things. The web can do all kinds of wonderful things. Some would argue, some of it does very well, and some of it does very poorly. But it does pretty much everything. And for us to be effective with Flutter, we had to choose a path, right? Do we want to allow you to take your apps, your code for building apps that target the desktop, that target the mobile, and bring it to the web, the same code, the same interaction style, the same? Or did we want to try to redo HTML in Flutter and kind of start over from where we were? And we optimized for apps because we wanted to get it in people's hands as soon as possible. Now, that's not to say that we won't be adding kind of these kinds of features over time, that we won't be expanding what Flutter can do, and not just for the web, but across all these platforms, right? I mean, that is the beauty of Flutter, right? When we do new things, it works everywhere, right? It's not a web specific thing, it's a Flutter thing. Mm-hmm. So over time, we plan to add kinds of new features. SEO is interesting because of the dynamic nature when we build apps, right? Essentially, it's a single page application. So you get an app with all of the widgets in place and no data, right? Because the data is added programmatically. Because think of how you write your Flutter code, right? That's how it works. And so the search engines come around and pull the page down, and it's empty, right? There's nothing there. And then JavaScript kicks in and it fills in all the content, and off you go. But by then the search engine has gotten what it's needed, and off it goes. So there are things we could do in the future, and certainly this is on our list. This is not, Rona, you're not the first person to ask for this, as you might imagine. But there's a way to solve that problem today. If you wanted to do server-side rendering and add that to your pipeline, this is the same. Any single-page application has this problem. This is not a Flutter-specific problem. You could do server-side rendering of using the HTML renderer and feed all of that data to the spider, the search spider, when it comes by, and you'll know, right? You can have two different rendering paths, and you can set all that up today if you want to. So,
yeah, interesting. I was wondering about that, if anybody's doing that. Randall, go for it.
Yeah. I was just waiting until all those thoughts were finished. I have a proof of concept already built. I built it in an afternoon that first detects if you're on Dart HTML. In other words, you're on a web platform, and it hooks into the router. And anytime the route changes, which it actually changes to / at the initial part of the program, so it does one hit right away, it pops off, pulls in Dart HTML, and edits the DOM according to data provided for that URL. And this means it can set the title correctly. It can set metadata correctly. I'm still sort of sorting out, this is still just proof of concept level. I don't know how real this will be for people, but I'm trying to build a kind of a nice UI that's separated from the other stuff. But if I can, if I can keep figuring this out, if I can also figure out how to get the Ahrefs in there that the crawlers are going to want, it's my understanding that the crawlers, especially Google's crawler for sure, not that that's related to this, but that the Google's crawler definitely will run the JavaScript and index it based on just that first initial run. It won't sit around all day. but it will actually run the first initial level. At least that's what the Google SEO stuff tells me. So I think at least getting title and meta correct would be useful for some people. And I do have code that's about 300 lines of code that can do it just fine. No JavaScript required.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's cool.
This is the beauty and wonder of the Flutter ecosystem, right? So much of the power of Flutter comes from work done outside of Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what I was going to inject, one of the things that I thought was really interesting possibility is PWAs. If I could sit there, because I keep reading articles about the impedance for people to add another app to their mobile devices, it's huge. They don't want to put another app on their device. But if I could put a PWA out that has enough things to sort of entice them, but I need to be able to do things that are more web appy for crawlers to grab and stuff. So I'm starting to build something that entices them. I'm just able to send out a simple link through an email or a reference on another web page, and it pulls them in. They start seeing things they like, and then it's like, oh, you want to go to the next step? You really want to engage with my app? Here's how to go to the App Store or Google Play Store. And since Flutter and Dart is great because I can build this all in one development environment with one code base, but I'm using the PWA as the lower impedance to suck them in and sort of get them enticed with what my app is and maybe some of the features of it. So it's a little bit website, a little bit web app, and then I can take them over to my full-blown mobile app. And I still haven't seen how to totally fit that in with the current Flutter web pieces, but I think it's getting there.
Cool.
Helps if I'm not muted. So this question kind of is a good follow-up to what you just mentioned, Michael. How does cloud messaging, such as Firebase cloud messaging, work within a progressive web app? How would one consider managing a login, or do you know of any resources to point towards?
Well, the very first research I will point people to is firebase.flutter.dev. And this will bring you to the list of Flutterfire plugins, is what we call them. And Flutterfire is a set of plugins that we've built to integrate Firebase into your Flutter apps. And looking at cloud messaging, we have nice green tick marks next to mobile, web, and Mac OS, which means you can build it for Android, iOS, Mac, and the web using Firebase messaging. And when it comes to login, we also support auth across all of those authentication to support login, mobile, web, and Mac OS. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, and Firestore is another one that supports all three. So the biggies, authentication, Firestore, cloud functions, cloud messaging, cloud storage are all, and core obviously are all supported across all three. So that's
right.
That's big. This is a handy little chart.
And we're, I'm curious, Michael, is this a flame chart, an icicle chart?
If it's blue and it's going down, it's icicles. If it's orange and yellow and going up, it's flames.
What about if it goes sideways?
Sideways, that's not a flame.
That's not a thing. We don't do that.
No.
That's an inversion. Okay.
All right, so this is a favorite question from Blake. He asked, what does the future look like for Flutter?
And before I add an addendum for the question, I'm really curious. You just put out null safety. I think you're well on the path to the multi-platform with desktop and stuff. So while it's not finished, what are those next big steps for Flutter and Dart?
Well, so now we're up to 6 platforms, plus working with various partners on others, as you saw in Flutter Engage, right? Toyota, right? To be able to run Flutter on your car, which, I can't wait for the test device to show up in my test lab, AKA my garage.
Right.
So, obviously we've got our hands full with platforms. And you may have noticed that over the last 2 years, or almost 2.5 years ago, we shipped the initial stable release of Android and iOS, and we have not stopped working on them. right? We're constantly updating them for the underlying operating systems as those change, and new features and new widgets and robustness and performance. And we haven't stopped working on those two platforms. Now we've got 4 others. We just released web to stable, but Rona isn't satisfied, so we have to keep going with Flutter Web. We're not done with Flutter Web yet, and we haven't released Windows, Mac, and Linux to stable yet. So we've got a lot more work to do. But even once we've gotten all of those to stable, we still have, now we're in a whole new world. What world is it where we've ever had before, where you have a viable solution, where you can take one hunk of source code and make it work across 6 platforms in a real way, right? From my point of view, at that point, we're just getting started, right? We just kicked the door open, and now people can make all this happen. Now, what is it that we do after that, right? Once we've solved, world hunger, we'll work on to world peace, right? I mean, we've never been in a world where we've actually solved a problem before, and so, we've got a whole ecosystem to continue to build out. Right now, there's 15,000 Flutter compatible packages and plugins. The vast majority of them work across all 6 platforms, but we still got some work to do in some of those plugins to bring them up to speed across those other platforms. We've got a whole world of new apps to invent and discover, right? How do you build your applications in a way that makes it reasonable, not to just have something that works across all 6 platforms, but something that works well, right? That takes advantage of the screen size and the different input modes and, the specific idioms, right? How do you make it, feel like it's taking advantage of the functionality of Windows when it runs on Windows and the functionality of Android and the web when it runs on those platforms? How do you build not just apps, but great apps from a single source code base across all of these platforms? These are unanswered questions in our industry. We've got a ton more work to do. And that's Flutter.
Yeah.
Then we've got this whole other thing underneath, which is Dart, right? And all the, we just added null safety, which was a multi-year effort. We just got out the door. And we've seen enormous uptake in the ecosystem for null safety, but we're not done there, right? We've got to, move everyone to null safety and make sure they understand what that means and that they have a good experience. And anyone who wants to do it has all the stuff from the ecosystem they want. But then the language itself has new features coming, right? We've talked about data classes from Kotlin. We've experimented with something called records in Dart. Bob talked about metaprogramming, right? We've taken out kind of reflection and runtime type information out of Dart on purpose, so that we have the smallest, fastest possible apps for our users, but we still want to provide that from a developer point of view, right? How do we get that functionality? And that's what metaprogramming is all about, right? How do we add that kind of reflection style programming back, but we do it at compile time instead of at runtime, right? So, I mean, we've got so much work to do, so much work.
So jump on that a little bit. I've been in software development for over 35 years, and the promise of the silver bullet, the cornucopia of cross-platform, especially being a Mac and Windows developer. Oh yeah, never has it been really fulfilled in my mind until Flutter and Dart. I'm not blowing sunshine up your skirt. That's true. Everything in history before this, you're right. It's amazing. I do have a quick little question. So I dabbled with IoT for a while, and I really thought Android Things was going to be an interesting opportunity, and then that sort of got all shut down. And I see an opportunity for Flutter to get into that whole IoT space, to sort of standardize it and give a platform that would give a lot of availability across a lot of these devices that are popping up. And there was early on, I saw Fortuna. There were a couple of videos showing it running on a Raspberry Pi. A little experimental and stuff. Is there any plan for moving into the IoT space?
Flutter itself, the goal of Flutter itself is fundamentally, and it's a big goal, to run wherever there are pixels to move.
Yes.
Right? That is the goal. Obviously, this is more than the Flutter team itself can bite off. But it's not just the Flutter team, I mean just the Google employees, right? Obviously, the wider Flutter ecosystem. The Raspberry Pi open source project is meant as a demonstration of bringing Flutter to other things. Look what Toyota did, right? They brought it to automotive grade Linux. They did all that themselves. We're here to support them, but that is fundamentally their work. Look at what we had, a placeholder for the Linux desktop, which the Canonical guys came in and they looked at it and said, that's cute. And they tossed it over their shoulder. They started over from scratch. And all of that comes from them, right? That they have built all that. We've started to partner with Microsoft, right? All of the dual screen stuff in Flutter came from Microsoft. And they worked to make their stuff work, not just on their own dual screen products, but dual screen products of any kind, right? Flutter is bigger, far bigger than what Google can do.
Yeah. As long as I hear you say that you're shooting for the moon, if you come short of it, at least your aspirations are where I want to see them, way out there. And, that you have these great goals just warms the cockles of my programming heart.
So I think that, go ahead.
My 2 cents are that I think this truly shows the power of Google, and maybe the power of Google's core values, because we were potentially right here 20 years ago with Java. Java was supposed to deliver upon all of these goals, and they certainly easily could have done it, but it seems like corporate things held them back, and it just didn't happen. And Microsoft tried it with Silverlight, and it didn't happen. But I think that because of the openness, because everything's open source, everything is open, and there's collaboration between Google and the users and the developers and the community, it is a tipping point almost in software development where everybody's on the same team. It's like no one's fighting and holding you back. Everybody's encouraging you to move forward. And it's amazing. It's about time. And I think it's going to go a long ways.
Yeah, I'm with you, Bert. I mean, software is a hit-based business, like movies, like TV shows, like books, right? And it's not enough to just have great technology and great tools, right? You also have to have great timing, and you have to have the right environment. And it is interesting when you look at where Flutter is today. The mobile platforms are very mature. The web is very mature. All the desktop platforms are very mature, and they've been gradually kind of leveraging ideas off of each other to make sure that even if the UI gestures are different or the particular pixels are arranged differently, fundamental functionality across all of these 6 platforms has really kind of merged in a lot of ways, which means that it is in fact viable for you to now build an app that works relatively the same and in fact takes advantage of the uniqueness of each of these platforms across them, because they have matured and they're not vastly different, right? They've come a long way. At the same time, right, the software engineers of the world have, we've been trying to solve this problem for 20 years, as you correctly point out. I think they're ready to say, great, Flutter, I get a great development experience. I get a native code at the other end, so my users don't have to pay the penalty for my great development experience, right? I think the time is right for us to really solve this problem. And of course,
Yeah.
The Flutter team at Google, and I think the Flutter community as a whole is pretty optimistic about where we are in time with the technology, with the partners, with the environment that we're in. We keep tilting at this windmill, but eventually, we're going to get that dragon.
It's starting to tilt. I think too, there's a potential for Flutter to be the preferred UI for Linux, which has just never really had a consistent preferred UI that everybody could agree upon. And I think that's possible. And I'm also excited, to see what's going to happen with Fuchsia. And if maybe, there's going to be a complete back end, front end solution, which is Fuchsia and Flutter. Is there anything you can say about that, or is that still just something down the road?
Well, certainly, Fuchsia is a product owned by another team at Google, and it would not be good for me to, make any announcements on their behalf. That just wouldn't be nice. I will point you at fuchsia.dev. And of course, that whole thing is open source as well, right? So you can dig in and see exactly what's going on in the project. Oh, and I guess he went to do it.
He did.
He took off to go check it out. Yeah, my understanding of Fuchsia, which is pretty limited, is that it's going to kind of open up the world of IoT to Flutter, and we really will start seeing Flutter literally everywhere. I'm curious though on that aspect of Flutter, having it run in so many different on so many different platforms. When you add a platform, when you decide that you're going to start supporting a new platform, how much extra work is it to continue to maintain, every time you make a change to the Flutter framework, you've got to make sure that it's going to work on all of these different platforms. You add a platform, what does that do? The test cycle and the quality assurance and all of that?
A lot. As it turns out, it does a lot, right? Of course, we have thousands of tests for Flutter that we run, and we have so many tests actually that we can't run them for every check-in. We have to, have a set of tests for check-in and then a set of tests. A little known fact: the difference between master and dev is master is just the initial check-in, run past the initial set of tests. Dev is the channel of after master has made its way into the internals of Google. Google has its own internal source code tree. We have to roll things. We call it a Flutter roll. We roll it in to Google. And of course, the literally millions of lines of source code in Google's repository that are Flutter based all of the tests there have to pass before we're able to put something into the dev channel. I don't spend my time on the master channel. I live in the dev channel because the dev channel is the fastest I can get the new features while still having it have already been validated by millions of lines of Google code and tests. And then we have another set of tests for beta, and then of course another set, the big set for stable. And every time you're totally right, Ron. Every time we add a platform, we have to set up the test infrastructure to make it, part of where we run those tests. And as part of the guarantee we provide at Stable is that we have the test infrastructure for that platform. So that was part of bringing web to Stable, making sure we had a test infrastructure that we could test it and be confident in the quality of Flutter on those platforms. And part of the reason that desktop is still in beta is that we haven't yet built up the test infrastructure the way we want it, that we're confident that it's stable level quality. So that's one of the guarantees we provide. At the same time, even on mobile itself is interesting. With desktop, we've got a couple of versions of or Mac OS, a couple of versions of Linux, a couple of versions of Windows we got to deal with. For iOS, we go all the way back to version 8. For Android, we go all the way back to SDK version 16, right? So there's a lot of testing infrastructure. And in fact, there's so many versions of these operating systems, these mobile operating systems, that we can't actually test them all. There's actually, if you go to flutter.dev, it'll lay out pretty clearly, here's the versions of each one of these operating systems that we support. And we break that support down into kind of team tested and community tested, right? So team tested is we've got either in the device lab or using Firebase test lab. We use a great deal of that resource. We've got these tests running on these machines, on these versions of the operating system, and we test those ourselves. Then there's the next level, which are older versions, which is we will fix issues here in this band, but these are versions that we don't actually test ourselves. We're pretty sure it's going to work. We look at the availability of the APIs and the various versions of the SDK, and we of course spin up tests on demand when there are issues that community members issue. And then of course there's the below this line we don't support at all. And it is just the testing and the infrastructure and making all that work. We have I'll say it again, an extraordinary infrastructure team at Flutter, right? A project the size of Flutter and the popularity of Flutter, which means that, the more popular you are, the more set of issues you have to deal with. And then, the 6 platforms, right? It's hard enough to support, Android across, a dozen different SDK versions. Now multiply that times 6. And that's what the testing infrastructure for Flutter looks
Right.
like.
It's like exponential every time you add a new one.
It is a big deal for sure.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me, well, to a lesser extent, but it reminds me of my web developer days of having to test all the different browsers and all the different versions of all the different browsers on Windows and on Mac and on Linux.
Oh, and by the way, with Flutter Web, it wasn't just does it work on where the browsers work. It's the vendors of the browsers, because there's
right.
4 big browsers that we support. It's not just Chrome, right? It's
Safari
and Firefox and Edge as well. We support all those browsers running Flutter Web.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Hey,
okay. Well, go ahead, Bert.
If you could apply that spirit of testing to packages, that would be wonderful. Because it does seem like there's a kind of a quality control problem with some packages.
So have you seen pub.green?
I've seen pub.green, but I've also, I have. Yeah.
So pub.green is actually provided by the nice folks at Nevercode, and it is their attempt to help us with that. Now, as you might imagine, well, again, with 15,000 Flutter compatible packages and plugins, we can't do the testing. And of course, we only at this point own a tiny, tiny fraction of those. The testing infrastructure for ours, the ones that we build and distribute and maintain, of course, it's the same testing infrastructure, right? So we do all that. But when it comes to the communities, pub.green is essentially our attempt, and again, it's provided by Nevercode, not by Google, to test the top packages and plugins across various versions of Flutter on various machines to attempt to do for the community as a whole without them having to set up CI or to pay anyone to run the CI jobs for them. This is a brand new project. I think we have all of the right things in place, but there's lots of new things we could do, more plugins, more platforms, more versions of Flutter, etc. I think we have all the runway in the world with pub.green, and with the idea, Bert, that we solve the problem you're talking about.
Yeah, great. I guess I don't know about pub.green. I was thinking about just the pub ratings inside pub.dev. So I will take a look at it, because that would be wonderful. Because it just seems like I ran into a lot of time wasted spinning wheels with with people that work for me when they try and use a package that they assume works, a new version of a package, like Firestore authentication. Firestore authentication using the email login, the email link where it sends you an email back so you can log in without a password. That actually has trouble right now for Android, and it's kind of a known problem, but we didn't know about it until really we started Googling a lot, to fish around and look. And maybe pubs.green actually has some way of tipping a person off that, you should be aware of this issue, or, users have reported problems in this. It's just one specific case, but it's something that we use and cause trouble.
But by the way, that should work. If it doesn't work, please log the bug. And if there's an existing bug already, send it to me, and I will talk to the Flutterfire team. The Invertase is the vendor we work with, and I have regular meetings with them. They're fantastic. Their knowledge of Firebase and Flutter is encyclopedic, and I've never yet mentioned a bug that lasted more than like 48 hours after I told them about it. So, we're constantly looking at that.
Okay.
That pub.green is interesting. I hadn't heard of it. What I had done for this particular situation is if there was a package that I wanted to use and it wasn't working, I wouldn't find out until I would put it in my PubSpec YAML. I love that I could check out here first, but what I've ended up doing is just looking at the change log and going back to, it's typically because I'm not on the latest.
Sure.
On the latest Flutter and the package is, and I've just looked at the change log to see what version is the last version before that, before they upgraded, and I can specify that in PubSpec YAML, and it usually works. I haven't run into a situation where it hasn't.
In my experience, I try to keep on the latest stable version of all the packages and plugins that I use, and there's a brand new command in Flutter and Dart. In the Flutter pub command specifically that I use all the time that I don't know if a lot of people know about it. It's called, so it's Flutter pub outdated.
Oh.
And outdated will tell you, here's the version you've got. Here's, according to your version spec, as high as you could go. Here's the one you should really be at, as high as it goes. And then there's null safety information in there as well.
Right,
so
that's right.
Outdated is a fantastic.
The null safety documentation, seeing if you're ready for it and stuff. That's the first time I was exposed to it. Yeah, it's a fantastic tool.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, we have monopolized your time for over an hour, Chris. We are so appreciative of your coming on and answering our questions. Yes, little round of applause.
It was fantastic questions and a wonderful discussion and a fabulous set of gray hairs to, all of us kind of, we've all been around.
I'm not there
We've
yet.
been around.
We were around 20 years ago, hoping for, that there would be, one single UI framework, and we've been trying to make it happen ever since. And that's where the gray hairs came from.
Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. So keep it up, and thank the team for us. I think everybody in the community is super appreciative of all the hard work the Flutter team is doing. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Randall, thank you for joining us on such short notice. It's great having you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I came right from another GGG right to this one. So it's been a busy day. It's been a busy day. Yes.
Much appreciated. It was nice to have you join us.
Can I have one more comment before we get out of here?
Of
One of the favorite tricks I use now is I go to my pubspec.yaml, back it up somewhere, just in case this doesn't work, and I replace all of the version numbers that are in there with an empty string, which means any. And then I let it go at it and see what the solver comes up with. And it does. It gives you the latest of everything, unless that would conflict with something else that wants it to be earlier. It's really slick. If there is a solution, that will come up with it.
I read an article on medium.com maybe about 6 months ago from the woman who architected the pub-get and how it goes through. And I was blown away. She and her team are an amazing group. because I dealt with React Native and how it tries to resolve it. That was just a nightmare. And when I saw her article, it was just speaks to the quality, like you say, of the team. You do work with some amazing people. Like I even wrote in the comments here, we see so far because we stand on the shoulders of giants. I believe that. It's an amazing team you got there. But like I said, her article explaining how Get works and how it does its version resolution is amazing.
I even wrote a tool that would go through my pubspec.lock after I do that and put all the version numbers it finally decided on as up arrow that number all the way down my file.
Wow.
So I am locked into that being the minimum base because that's what I'm testing it with right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very slick.
Yep.
I do all sorts
Thank you,
of
Chris.
things.
It was my pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks. Bye all.
And thanks for
Thanks,
everybody on YouTube who joined and had good questions. We appreciate you all.
Yep.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank
See you
you.
next time. Probably somewhere. Probably at a GG meeting.
See ya.
Or online. You see me online.